Khrushchev wrote in his memoirs, "Have you never wondered why the President of the United States was not present at the launch of Apollo 11? Eve Kendell, Nixon's personal secretary at that time, made it clear that she would not object to stirring up some 30-year-old memories. It was Henry Kissinger who first took her on as an intern in the White House when she was still only 20. In Washington, Donald Rumsfeld, newly appointed Defense Secretary by President George Bush, celebrates his arrival in the Pentagon. With him are the ex-Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Lawrence Eagleberger, General Alexander Haig, and the head of the CIA, Richard Helms. 30 years previously, these five were President Nixon's main advisors.
Are we through?
All right, one more drink and then I'm ready.
There you go. I'm only teasing you.
You have a great chance to make a fool of me.
What is going on? What in the world? Hello, Mel. How are you?
I don't know, he looks a little slippery.
Now, how are we doing this? He's asking, you're asking the question.
Answer in English.
Well, but then you're going to have to translate them, so I know for sure what I'm being asked.
I understand French. I don't speak it very well, but I understand it.
Okay.
What's your problem?
No, don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah, those are the kind of questions that you have on TV every night.
That's a long and complicated story.
Only a few people need to know.
I'll tell you a fascinating story.
The whole thing?
Are you running?
You're going to cut it all out of this thing anyway, but...
Let me tell you, off the record.
Turn the camera off.
It's an incredible story. Newly elected, Nixon was up to his neck in the Vietnam War. He needed a big stunt to reverse his negative image with the American public.
President Nixon was on the telephone, speculating. He kept fiddling with the telephone cord. The Oval Office was in semi-darkness, and I found it very difficult to take notes of this meeting.
We had a meeting and talked, and he had made a number of decisions already, basically to try to calm things down.
The director of the CIA was looking panicked. He always overestimated the power of the Soviets. The Russians will put a man on the moon. It's only a matter of months, maybe even days. I have very accurate information about that. We can't wait another year. We have to launch Apollo 11 as soon as we can.
I was on the telephone constantly and at meetings and various other ways trying to promote more energy, more aggressiveness in this matter.
I said to the president then, I said, you can't let this succeed, and you must do everything necessary to make sure that it doesn't.
Now, the president turned to his experts at NASA and said, "Are we ready?" The director of the space agency only half reassured him. He said, "We might not be able to send back films of the first steps on the moon." Well, President Nixon refused that idea. No way. The whole world is waiting to see an American take the first steps on the moon.
He was very upset about it, and that he felt that something had gone wrong and maybe he was responsible.
The President of the United States was irate.
The sequence of events I remember as the most tense.
Then one of the presidential advisors, I don't know, General Alexander Haig or Donald Rumsfeld, said hesitantly, what if we film the first steps on the moon in a studio? Then if we fail, we can always show those pictures to the public.
I talked to the president, and Kissinger supported it.
And at first I didn't take it very seriously, and I was told not to take it very seriously. Then it kept going on and on and on.
The president was prepared to do so, and I was prepared to support that.
And that was decided basically by Henry, Al Haig, and the Secretary of Defense.
But in the last analysis, the only person who could make the decision to do A, B, or C is the President of the United States under our system. And he would have to order it done.
Nixon settled back in his chair and closed his eyes for a few minutes. And then he stood up and said, "Gentlemen, you have less than 2 weeks to get everything prepared."
That was big. That was a big idea. It was an important thing, and a lot of effort went into it.
It was an anguishing decision for President Nixon to make. And I think he made the right decision.
He was the president, and he deserves credit for having had the courage to do it.
He did that on his own. Sensible thing to do.
Then he came over to me and picked up all my notes, ripped them up into little pieces, and threw them in the wastebasket.
No stage in my life could I ever have anticipated that this would happen. At no stage, not even when I was made National Security Advisor. And I think it is a great symptom of the strength of America that this was even conceivable.
I thought it was the right thing to do because we have to do something to show that we're still the United States of America. We walked out of the room, and President Nixon said, I've decided to do that, and I need you to do this job. We're going to do it. It was just amazing. So we were trying to figure out who would do what when. He simply has got to have the person he wants in that job. And it has to be someone who's capable of doing it, and it has to be somebody he knows well. I said, I'd like to talk to one person. And he said, who?
Donald Rumsfeld was the first to propose Stanley Kubrick. The film would have to be perfect, but the set could never be built in time. The filming of 2001: A Space Odyssey was drawing to a close in a suburb of London. Why not use the sets there? Rumsfeld was sure that Kubrick would not refuse. During the Kennedy administration, the White House had granted him special authorization to access strategic areas of the Pentagon during the preparations for the film Dr. Strangelove. Kubrick owed them. I told Mr. Nixon it's very dangerous to lie in the United States. You can't pull a con like that in a democracy. Too many people would talk. It would be absurd. But he said, almost sadly, go ahead anyway. Rumsfeld offered to go and negotiate personally with Stanley Kubrick. He and Henry Kissinger flew to England that same evening. Kubrick was surprised and amused by the idea, but began by refusing. Rumsfeld wouldn't give up. We're only asking you to do one thing. Just leave us the keys to the studio for one weekend, just so we can shoot a bit of film and take a few shots. Everything will be tidied up again by Monday morning. Kissinger flattered him, telling him that Dr. Strangelove was one of Nixon's favorite films. In the end, Kubrick agreed. The fake footage would be shot in England in the MGM studios near Boreham Wood with a skeleton crew. The 2 technicians and 2 actors would be CIA agents. To guarantee their trustworthiness, all had to be single men without family ties. They would sign a contract committing themselves to perpetual silence about the whole affair. Once the filming was over, they would have to disappear. But Stanley Kubrick was a perfectionist. Faced with the CIA crew's lack of professionalism, he ended up, against his better judgment, supervising the shooting of the fake moonwalk. But, he told them, from Monday morning, you're out of my life for good.
My goodness, that is somebody.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the Apollo 11 crew, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin. Neil?
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July that was certainly the highlight for the 3 of us of that decade. We're going to divert a little bit from the format of past press conferences and talk about the things that interested us most, in particular the things that occurred on and about the moon. We will use a number of films and slides which most of you have already seen, and with the intent of pointing out some of the things that we observed on the spot which may not be obvious to those of you who are looking at them here from the surface of Earth. The flight, as you know, started promptly. And I think that was characteristic of all the events of the flight. The Saturn gave us one magnificent ride, both into Earth orbit and on a trajectory to the moon. Our memory of that actually differs little from the reports that you have all heard from those previous Saturn V flights, and the previous flights served us well in preparation for this flight in the boost as well as the subsequent phases. We would like to skip directly to the translunar coast phase and remind ourselves of the chain of events, that long chain of events that actually permitted the landing, starting with the undockings, the transposition